Brad Stanfield's diet. This is Dr. Brad Stanfield's video on the best diet as confirmed by science. And I'm making a response video not so much in the sense that I completely disagree with the video. I like the video. I disagree with some of the ways he puts things, and I don't think it's the complete picture. And I'm going to get into that in this video. First, I'm going to go over why it's obviously not the complete picture. But first, what I want to say is, in the beginning of the video when he tells people to stay with whatever diet they want, here I'll show you.
Studies all published this year have independently confirmed the best diet for human health, and we'll go through each study step by step. Now, before we begin, I do want to acknowledge that diet is a very personal decision. For example, some people swear by the carnivore diet, others the vegan diet. What matters though is that you follow a diet that works for you, that makes you feel energized, protects your heart, maximizes your muscle strength, and maintains a healthy weight. I'm not here to convince you of anything. I'm just reporting on.
Now, the problem that he just pointed out there is he's explaining that he's saying essentially that it's okay to follow the carnivore diet if you feel as though it works for you. I highly disagree with that. Okay, now I do believe in healthy keto. I do believe in that, although he doesn't believe in healthy keto. I'm not going to go through his whole video. His video is linked in my description. I very, very, very strongly recommend anybody interested in longevity and just being healthy subscribes to Dr. Brad Stanfield's channel. Okay? Bottom line, if you just want to be healthier, a healthier version of you, and you want information to help you do that, subscribe to Dr. Brad Stanfield's channel. And I'm going to move on. I'm going to move on here. Now, one of the things in Dr. Stanfield's video that he talks about is essentially the concept of replacing other foods with plant proteins and how that shows more benefit. And I think that that's a very good point. And this is one of the biggest misconceptions when people say a high carbohydrate diet is very heart protective. A high carbohydrate diet is very this. A high carbohydrate diet is very that. No, it's not necessarily a high carbohydrate diet. It's a high plant protein diet. It's a diet high in beans and lentils and legumes, okay? These are all high in carbohydrates, but they're also high in plant protein and high in phytonutrients, protective phytonutrients. This is one of the main reasons that a high plant diet is so protective is the phytonutrients, okay? And also what you're not eating. You're not eating the saturated fat, you're not eating the cholesterol, etc. So this is about Frank Zane, and he did this hardly is a study, but these are different bodybuilders, ones that died of natural causes, not ones that died in car accidents and things of that nature. So you have John Grimmick died at 88, John Farbotnik, 73, Steve Reeves, 74, Reg Park, 79, Vince Gironda, 80, Zabo Kozowski. Now remember, Vince Gironda's diet was essentially, he would switch back between a carnivore diet, a vegan diet, but he essentially followed a carnivore diet, what he called the steak and eggs diet. Okay? So there's more to it than just diet. Dick Dubois, age 74, George Eiferman, 77, Armin Tanny, 90, Vic Tanny, 73, Joe Gold, 82, Jack LaLanne, 96, Bob Delmontique, 90, Joe Weider, 93, Bob Hoffman, 87, Jules Bacon, 90, Ron Lacey, 76, Jack Dellinger, 66, Mickey Haggerty, 80, Clarence Ross, 85, Jim Park, 80, Eugene Sandow, 57, Walt Baptiste, 84. So the average bodybuilder lifespan, from what Frank Zane was to determine from this. Now remember, Frank Zane was a high school chemistry and mathematics teacher, so he's no stranger to the wonderful world of research. He had to go to college, you know what I mean? He had to be familiar with that to teach it. So In the list, he did not include bodybuilders who died from accidental deaths. You can see if a person exercises regularly. Now, this is what's important. If they exercise regularly and follow a sensible nutrition program, as serious bodybuilders, at least back in that era, did, it increases the likelihood of a longer life. All of the bodybuilders in this list are from the pre-steroid era. So these old-timers lived an average of 81 years without exogenous hormones. He said he's curious to see how long today's steroid-abusing bodybuilders will last. My guess is not as long, as we see them dropping dead in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Best you can do is slow down degenerative aging, he says, changes and look and feel good as you get older. Flesh and bones, blah, 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 blah. His conclusion is based upon this research is that bodybuilders live longer than the average person. Why? Because they take better care of themselves, okay? They know about nutrition and eat better than the average and don't rely on junk and fast foods for nourishment. They exercise regularly and keep regular hours, and they have positive optimistic attitude in general. One factor of successful aging seems to be keeping the mind active, blah, blah, blah. So essentially what you have to understand is, and I'm going to show this, the concepts expressed in the research that Dr. Brad Stanfield goes over, these are not new concepts. These go all the way back to the beginnings of naturopathy. Okay, a naturopathic style diet is a good diet. And what was funny is the same day that I came out with one of my videos, might have been all of I forget whether I did them all in one shot or not, but more dietary wisdom of the great apes on psychopathology and diet. Every species has a species-specific diet. Okay? Now, the closer you get to that species-specific diet, the better you're going to fare. Now, if you get close to that species-specific diet and you supplement it with some key nutrients, as is done in livestock and things of that nature, you can do a lot better. Now, people that don't know who Dr. Joel Wallach is should look into Dr. Joel Wallach. Read the book Dead Doctors Don't Lie and understand this. Now, Dr. Wallach doesn't share my view of a great ape diet for the human animal, but it seems to me pretty obvious that the diet of the human being, because the diet of the hunter-gatherer is essentially the same as the diet of the chimpanzee. The only primary difference is some of the foodstuffs are different, but essentially it's a lot of vegetables, a lot of fruit, a lot of lower sugar fruit, and a little tiny bit of meat here, a little tiny bit of fish here, with chimpanzees they don't eat fish, but a tiny bit of lean protein, a whole lot of vegetables. Okay, now is that high in carbohydrate? Of course it is. We know from studying most hunter-gatherer diets, especially the hunter-gatherers that have lived closer to the chimpanzees or in similar regions such as in South America, they follow a diet that is comprised of many of the same foods or similar foods as a chimpanzee. And their diet is higher in or very high in carbohydrates. It's also extremely high in dietary fiber, both soluble and insoluble fiber. Now, this is important because soluble and insoluble fiber do a great thing for the digestive tract. What they do is they help to feed the microbiota. Now, another thing that you have to understand is eating more plant protein seems to make you fare better. Now, who knew that? Now, if you look at the Blue Zone's diets, we already know that. Now, if you look at the naturopathic diets, such as the naturopathic diet expressed in the book Back to Eden, we know that eating a lot of beans helps you fare well. Okay? This is before the age of raw science, but it's been observably true for many centuries now. So, at least for 2 centuries. Now, I'm going to move on to the next thing here. So this is one of the research papers that Dr. Brad Stanfield went over. I have these numbered 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, and 4 in my thing. So these are the results. Conclusions: higher mortality was observed for overall low carbohydrate diet and unhealthy low carbohydrate diet, but slightly lower risks for healthy low carbohydrate diet. Best results support importance of maintaining a healthy low fat diet with less saturated fat and preventing all-cause and specific mortality among middle-aged and older people. Now, we already know that the Mediterranean diet, which is a particularly high-fat diet, is very health-promoting. Okay, it's not very high fat, but it is a higher fat diet. It's about 30% or more of the calories in the Mediterranean diet can come from fat. So is it about the fat or the type of fat? Is it about the protein or the type of protein? Is it about the carbohydrates or the type of carbohydrates? Now, what I think, and what I think the research does show as I move forward, is it's not so much the quantity, it's not so much the types of macronutrients you're consuming. It's the sources of those macronutrients. Are you eating saturated fat or are you eating monounsaturated fat? Are you eating a high starch diet or are you eating a very high fiber diet? Okay? Are you eating a high meat diet or are you eating a high bean diet? Okay, these are questions you need to be asking yourself. Because we already know that some of these foods are health promoting while others are health destroying. So this is a comparison of 7 structured diets, yada yada yada. This goes all through how the study's done. We don't need all that. I just want to go to the conclusion here. So with moderate certainty, evidence shows that programs promoting Mediterranean and low-fat diets, the Mediterranean diet is not low-fat, with or without physical activity or other interventions reduce all-cause mortality and non-fatal myocardial infarction in patients with increased cardiovascular risk. Mediterranean programs are also likely to reduce stroke risk generally. Okay, other named dietary programs were not superior to minimal intervention. So this one's about the effects of cutting down on saturated fat to reduce the risk of heart disease or heart attacks. Now, we already know the answer here. So there is a large, this is anybody that does not believe that saturated fat is causing heart disease in a lot of cases is a complete, they're ignorant of the evidence. So quality of evidence, there is a large body of evidence assessing the effects of reducing saturated fat for at least 2 years. These studies provide moderate quality evidence that reducing saturated fat reduces our risk of cardiovascular disease. So the author's conclusion, the finding of this updated review suggests that reducing saturated fat intake for at least 2 years causes a potentially important reduction in combined cardiovascular events, replacing the energy from saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat. So again, you're still replacing it with fat or carbohydrate appear to be useful strategies. So replacing it with unsaturated fat, in this case polyunsaturated fat, though in most cases monounsaturated fat is the better of the two, the reduction in combined cardiovascular, and there's a reason why. Now, you do need certain polyunsaturated, a certain amount of omega-3 and omega-6, but the monounsaturated fat is more stable. So the reduction in combined cardiovascular events resulting from reducing saturated fat did not alter by study duration, sex, or baseline level of cardiovascular risk. So what you have to understand is, regardless of whether you were a dude or a chick, regardless of whether you were conditioned or unconditioned, regardless of whether, maybe that's it. The thing is that reducing saturated fat for the average person, and probably most people, is a net positive when it comes to reducing your risks of cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular events. Moving forward. So this is about plant protein versus animal protein. So what you have to understand here is I was one of these morons. I followed an Atkins-style diet since I was a teenager because it got me the results I needed to lose a lot of weight. And even when I became a pescatarian, a vegetarian, and a vegan, I still retained the Atkins eating style. And it worked very well, okay, because of the nutrient density of the Atkins eating style, okay? It's a very nutrient-dense diet, particularly if it's vegan. Now, I stupidly switched to a high carbohydrate form of eating that was based on the McDougall concepts. And I got huge, okay? So what you need to understand here, now remember, I talked about Frank Zane in the beginning. So remember, what Dr. Stanfield is saying is a higher carbohydrate diet is proven to be better for you. Yes. But I think it has to do more with the types of carbohydrates, not necessarily, like, where are you getting those carbohydrates and what kind of carbohydrates are they? Are they refined carbohydrates or are they high fiber, high water carbohydrates? So the conclusion, so this is what you have to understand. Remember, bodybuilders do tend to live longer than the average person, the pre-steroid bodybuilders. Why? Higher intake of total protein, all protein, including animal protein, was associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality. And intake of plant protein was associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality and cardiovascular disease. Replacement of foods high in animal protein with plant protein sources could be associated with longevity. So one more time. Higher intake of total protein, so from all sources, was associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality because it helps to retard sarcopenia and things of that nature, and it helps with the immune system. Protein is a very important nutrient. Don't fall for the low-protein garbage like I did, okay? And the intake of plant protein was associated with a lower risk of all-cause mortality plus a reduction in cardiovascular mortality. So, the replacement of, cardiovascular disease mortality. So, the replacement of foods high in animal protein with ones that are high in plant protein could be associated with longevity. Now, if you are replacing animal protein with plant protein, assuming you're not using refined faux meats and things of that nature, you are going to increase the total carbohydrate intake. However, what you're also going to increase is the fiber intake. You have to remember that fiber is carbohydrate, but when you're counting net carbs, if you're doing a carbohydrate counting diet, you have to subtract the fiber because it does not count as your overall carbohydrates. However, it is metabolized by the bacteria in your stomach, okay? But what you need to, or in your guts. Now, what you need to understand, so you're increasing your total carbohydrate, but you're really increasing a whole hell of a lot of fiber, and you're really increasing a whole hell of a lot of phytonutrients. Some of these phytonutrients, like black bean extract, which is the phytonutrients in black beans, has been shown to reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease. Now, that in mind, the plant protein, and I'm going to show this later in a later video, when people try to combine proteins, you'll see you're probably just better off eating another 2, 3, or 4 servings of beans a day as opposed to combining whole grain whatever with beans. You get a better protein profile just by having more beans. I'm not saying you shouldn't eat whole grains. What I'm saying is you get more of the essential amino acids that you need simply by eating more beans. Moving forward. So diets high in protein, particularly plant protein, are linked to lower risk of death. This is the same research, but it's on a different platform, and I recommend people read it. Association of animal and plant protein intake with all-cause mortality and cause-specific mortality. The median conclusion: high animal protein intake was positively associated with cardiovascular mortality. Is it because of the protein, or is it because of the other stuff in the meat? The endotoxins, the cholesterol, all that jazz. Okay, and high plant protein intake was inversely associated with all-cause cardiovascular mortality, especially among individuals with at least one lifestyle risk factor. Substitution of plant protein for animal protein, especially that from processed meat, was associated with lower mortality, suggesting the importance of proteins, of the protein source. Remember, I just said that. So remember, the source of the protein matters more than the fact that it's protein. It probably matters even more than the protein profile. You want to get your essentials. Okay, for a while people were talking about how methionine is poison and all this, and you should restrict methionine. I fell for that. I don't believe it anymore. Okay, I believe that there's a lot more to it, and I don't believe methionine. And methionine is an essential amino acid. You probably shouldn't overdo it. But is it the methionine that's causing the problems, or is it the source, the high meat diet? The study finds diets rich in non-indispensable amino acids is better for cardiovascular health. So this means that diets high in non-essential amino acids are better for cardiovascular health. The study was recently published online, blah, blah, International of Epidemiology, yada, yada, yada. The study in amino acids are building blocks for protein, and the so-called indispensable amino acids, which are the essential amino acids, which, by the way, are highly present also in many plant foods like beans, but also found in eggs, cheese, and poultry, have long been considered as the most important because they are strictly required for the body to synthesize protein. In contrast, non-indispensable amino acids in foods like pumpkin seeds, now this is not true because these have indispensable amino acids too, but like pumpkin seeds, walnuts, lentils, and soybeans are classically deemed of little importance because they do not limit protein synthesis. However, those amino acids are not just building blocks for protein, as they are also involved in many other biological processes. In particular, they impact vascular health, blah, blah, blah. Growing interest in protein and amino acids for cardiovascular health, in particular, as plant and animal protein sources are concerned. Fraser, blah, blah, blah. Reports regarding amino acids, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so what I'm saying here, what I would say is it so much the fact that these protein sources are higher in indispensable or non-indispensable amino acids, or is it more important that they are not high in things like saturated fat, cholesterol, and that they're also simultaneously high in things like protective phytonutrients, monounsaturated fat instead of saturated unfat, polyunsaturated fat instead of saturated fat, essential fatty acids instead of non-essential fatty acids. You get what I'm saying? You gotta think about what are the other causes. Now, do I have absolute proof that that's the case? No, but I think that we can use our noggins here and make a pretty good conclusion about that stuff. Now, Dr. Stanfield he's exclaiming the importance of a low-fat, high-carbohydrate, lower protein, lower-fat, high-carbohydrate diet. The problem with that is, now I wouldn't recommend cooking with these oils, but I would unless you absolutely must use oil for something, so it doesn't stick, but more so I would recommend using them as a dressing. But plant-sourced cooking oil consumption is associated with lower total mortality in longitudinal study. So plant-sourced cooking oil consumption is associated with lower mortality. So it's not just high carbohydrates, it's also key oils. Intakes of plant-sourced cooking oils, including peanut oil, soybean oil, canola oil, salad oil, and other plant cooking oils, not saturated fat oil, not animal-based oils, and substituting plant cooking oils for animal cooking oils were associated with lower total mortality among the general Chinese population. Moving forward. So, nut and seed consumption and risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and their risk factors, a systemic review and meta-analysis, blah, blah, blah. Okay, conclusion, there is probable relationship between consumption of nuts and seeds and a lower risk of cardiovascular disease. More fat and protective phytochemicals, but more fat from nuts and seeds, lower cardiovascular disease risk. This does not mesh with the idea of a high carbohydrate, low fat, low protein diet. These are high fat, relatively high protein foods. They're nuts. So frequent consumption of nuts has previously been associated with lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Consumption of total nuts and seeds is associated with lower risk of cardiovascular disease. Inclusion of nuts in official food-based blah, 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 blah. You can read this on your own. Moving on. So many people are unaware that dogs are not actually carnivorous. Dogs and wolves and foxes and these things, these canine animals, they're actually omnivorous animals. They eat a little bit of everything. Kind of like us, kind of like chimps and bonobos and humans, okay? And pigs. So vegan, mildly cooked and human grade dog food, meaning it's vegan, mildly cooked and human grade ingredients, are becoming more popular as beliefs and views of pet owners change to our knowledge. However, dog studies have not examined the digestibility of commercial vegan diets, blah, 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 blah. 3 commercial dog foods were tested. The study consisted of 3 experimental periods, blah, 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 blah. So the plain language, for those that are viewing my channel, vegan, mildly cooked, human-grade dog foods are increasingly popular, but few studies have been performed to examine their performance. The objective of these researchers was to determine the apparent total tract digestibility of mildly cooked, human-grade dog foods and their effects on blood metabolites. 2 mildly cooked human-grade vegan dog foods and a chicken-based extruded dog diet were tested using 12 healthy adult dogs and a replicated 3x3 Latin square design. All diets were highly digestible, okay, with all nutrients having digestibility values of over 80% in a dog. Vegan diets had higher ATT. I don't know what that stands for. Okay, they had higher digestibility. The vegan diets had higher digestibility of fat, but lower digestibility of organic matter. Dogs consuming vegan diets, listen to this, dogs, canines, that everybody thinks are carnivorous, canines consuming vegan diets had lower circulating cholesterol, lower circulating triglycerides, lower platelets, lower neutrophils than dogs consuming the extruded diet. So, a dog responds to a vegan diet in much the same way a human would. Dogs consuming vegan diets had lower dry matter percentages and phenol and blah 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 concentrations, and higher fecal short chain fatty acids. Meaning their shit was healthier essentially. Okay. So I personally, like most vegans, although I'm not technically a vegan, I don't adhere to all the kookiness of veganism, but like most people that are vegans, I love cats. Okay? I am a proud cat owner. I got 2 cats. Okay? So what you need to understand about cats are carnivores. They only, in a state of nature, their species-specific diet is meat. Okay? So, if dogs can do it, why can't cats? Very good reason, okay? Cats are obligate carnivores, meaning that they need to eat meat to survive. There are a number of reasons why cats don't do well on a vegan diet, but it all essentially, so please, if you own a cat, don't make your cat a vegetarian. Please. They aren't adapted to it. Feeding a cat a plant-based diet is not like feeding a cow a meat-based diet. Their digestive system isn't geared to handle it, although I probably wouldn't feed a cow a meat-based diet either. Okay, so taurine is an amino acid, the building blocks. Now, taurine also has beneficial effects on the human heart, which I'm going to get into later. So, taurine can only be found in animal sources, meat, milk, etc. It is not found in plants. Taurine can be synthesized in humans and dogs, but cats are unable to do this and require a direct source, meaning cats need to get their taurine from their diet. Now, Dr. Bruce Ames considers taurine a longevity vitamin. Cats who are fed a vegan diet will often develop a deficiency of taurine because the diet doesn't provide any taurine. Cats with a taurine deficiency, along with people, even though people can make it, some people don't make enough of it, will develop heart issues, known as dilated cardiomyopathy in cats, blah, blah, blah. Protein. Cats require, now this is what's important to understand. I had my cats on a healthy cat diet, okay? I did switch from the grain-free because the grain-free was less healthy than the one with grain. However, what I eventually had to do was go back to a kitten food. So after my one cat that got fat reached her ideal weight, we had to go back to a kitten food, which was much higher in fat and much higher in protein. Cats need protein and they need fat, okay? Carbohydrates. Cats are not good at digesting carbohydrates. They don't get energy from them, not very much. A carbohydrate-rich diet is not appropriate for cats. A carbohydrate-rich diet is not appropriate for cats, okay? They need calorie-dense options that meat provides. They need calorically dense options that meat provides. The bottom line is that because cats are obligate carnivores, their gastrointestinal tract and metabolism, kind of like how ours is more adapted to plants, theirs is far more adapted to eating meat. They cannot digest plant material well, and they require essential nutrients that only meat can provide to them. They aren't adapted to digesting a plant-based diet, and meat absolutely needs to be on your cat's table. Moving on. So you want to follow a bodybuilding diet and get those longevity benefits of Frank Zane. Frank Zane's talking about, right? Well, number one, I would recommend following a bodybuilding diet that's been sized down to suit your caloric needs and doing some strength training and some cardio training and some stretching and things of that nature like bodybuilders do. Get a book on bodybuilding, get a book on body sculpting. You don't have to become a pro to get healthy, but definitely do what you need to do to get going. So this is a link to a